Stars in Revolt. Humans lead the fight for universal rights. By Elton Gar.
I don't understand. What do they think they're doing?
Volstag Tusslesgraf said, looking out of the window of the city hall onto the mass of humans standing outside. There were at least 1,000 of them, many of them in the street. They were holding up signs and yelling, but other than annoying everyone, they didn't seem to be doing anything.
They call it protesting, and they insist it's their right,
Timron said. His tentacles twitched as he said the word right. It wasn't so much the rights as the insisting. The humans were here because they had been saved from their own world, which was becoming uninhabitable because of their decisions, and were sixth-class citizens because, as a species, they hadn't yet earned the trust to be higher. He had explained that to the humans, as had dozens of other officials on this world, and as many or more on hundreds of other worlds, and yet the humans continued to complain and insist on being treated differently. The most frustrating aspect was that if the humans had just shut up and went to work, they'd be fifth-class citizens by now, and that would give them several of the rights that they wanted, including the right to gather in groups of up to 100.
Has anyone explained to them that they are currently breaking the law and that will slow the forward progress of their race?
Volstag said.
They yelled at him until he fled back inside,
Timron said.
Then I don't see how we have any choice. Send out the patrol androids to disperse the crowd.
100 faceless machines approached the crowd. They were designed for combat, but their orders were to not hurt anyone. It should have been easy. The humans were small and far too weak to fight back. But when the first robot grabbed a human, it went limp, collapsing to the ground. The robot became confused. It had access to full human anatomy texts and understood just how fragile they were, but even humans shouldn't collapse so easily. Volstag was confused for a moment as well, but he caught on faster than the robot. The robot tried to remove the human, but it had orders not to hurt it, so it couldn't just drag the human. After a few seconds of trying to understand, another of the robots came to assist it. With one holding each arm, they were able to drag the human, but even with 2 androids, the human was still dragged across the ground. Since protesting was a novel thing, the media was already here. None of those were human, of course, since your species had to be of the 3rd rank or higher, as did the individual to hold that official position. That in many ways made things worse, because those reporters had far more credibility than any human. And it wasn't just one person. Every human threw themselves on the ground as soon as the patrol droids got near them. The first few androids simply removed the humans from the road. But as soon as they put the humans down, they stood up and rushed back into place, and the robots were forced to carry them out again. It was almost funny, and would have been if what the humans were insisting on wasn't so absurd. They wanted to ignore the societal systems that had existed since before humans had built their first cities. They wanted to be able to take any role in society, own any land they could take, meet in groups of any size, and say whatever they wanted. There were far more things, of course. But the humans seemed less interested in access to the restricted technologies and advanced genetic alteration. Perhaps because they didn't understand it, or because their attempts to fumble through it had turned out badly enough, they understood the restrictions. Eventually, the robots were forced to restrain the humans so that they could clear the roadway. Once the humans were restrained, Volstag walked out to meet with the humans. Their leader was a woman, shorter than most children. The robots released her restraints, and Volstag said,
"You are inconveniencing people for no reason. Our society has been stable for tens of thousands of years."
By not allowing people any freedom,
the woman said.
Your people are in many ways more free in our society. We simply ask you to prove you are capable of responsibility before you are allowed to do things that may disrupt our society.
We have rights,
the woman said. The humans seemed to think that word had some magic to it. Whenever anyone tried to explain anything to them, they would start with that.
We give you food and shelter. We allow you to spend your days as you wish. Yet you insist you be given more.
One of the men behind the woman shouted,
"No taxation without representation.
Uncertain about what taxation was, Volstag connected to the human database. Taxation was a system on Earth where people gave money to the government, which it then used to organize society.
We do not have taxation,
Volstag said.
That's not really the point. You want us to follow the rules of your government, but don't allow us any say in those rules,
the woman said. The way she said it sounded almost reasonable. That was a problem, because while the humans' protest didn't make any sense, it had gotten a lot of people's attention.
I would prefer not having to limit you further,
Volstag said.
I'm sure you would,
The woman said, and then she sat on the ground, showing no sign at all of being reasonable.
Okay. You will each be required to remain in your home for the next week. You will also be given 3 demerits which will count against your advancement of societal rank.
The woman smiled as if she understood something and then laid limp on the grass. Volstag didn't think much about the humans over the next week. He liked the species well enough and was glad that they had been able to save them from themselves. But things had changed for them. They had been forced to leave their own world because of their bad decisions, and yet insisted on being allowed to make more here. They wanted to run businesses just like the ones that had polluted their world, and elect leaders like the ones who had allowed it to happen. And as soon as their week of home arrest was over, the humans returned. Except this time there were more of them, and even 3 Droven. The Droven were a fairly simple race that had worked their way up to rank 4, and stayed there for decades with only the slight upward movement that any race had over time by simply not disturbing the peace. And Volstag had assumed they were fine with that. There were entire species of intelligent beings who never tried to join the councils or even run businesses. They were satisfied, and that was enough. But it wasn't just that there were a few Droven. There were almost twice as many humans, and they seemed more angry than before. Well, that was fine. He had clearly been too easy on the humans. He had overlooked their violation of laws prohibiting large gatherings of 6th-class citizens and disruption of traffic. This time he barely considered what to do. He would simply restrain them longer, and that would give them more time to consider the value of their actions. But the humans didn't react the same way. This time they threw rocks, bottles of water, food, and anything else they had at the androids. Several of them even began to hit them with their protest signs. None of that would even scratch the androids, which were designed to survive real weapons. But it triggered a response from the androids. They still had orders to not kill anyone, but they stopped trying to move them safely and began to use their non-lethal weaponry. The weapons were designed to be as safe as possible. They, mostly painlessly, disrupted the body's ability to control itself, so that the person fell helplessly to the ground. But humans were so fragile that even falling could do damage and even had a chance of injuring them. Beyond that, it just looked bad. The humans were being disruptive, but they hadn't done anything that could actually harm anyone. The worst was that even though they told people that they hadn't hurt the humans, having the androids dragging away limp bodies looked like they had hurt them even if they didn't. Because of that, and because they all disappeared for the 2 weeks of house arrest, the rumors began, mostly among the humans. They started minor, but the more people that talked about them, the more they changed, and soon, people were convinced that the Alliance Governing Council was executing the humans. It made no sense. If the Alliance had wanted to eliminate humans, they simply wouldn't have rescued them from the planet that they were destroying. Because even if they had somehow managed to survive their own folly, it would have been hundreds of more years before they discovered how to get to anywhere outside of their own solar system. All of those rumors should have went away when they all returned to outside of the city hall 2 weeks later. But people convinced themselves that it had been the rumors that had saved the humans rather than them never being in any danger. That, along with the other news coverage, made the protest considerably bigger than the last time. There were once again twice as many humans, and a few members of other races that were of rank 4 and below. But there was also an Zekomorn. The Zekomorn had Class 1 privileges as a race and would gain nothing from protesting. If anything, it would lower his personal standing, which became even more important as your species rose in standing. The humans put him near the front, so he was in every picture the reporters took. A young man with thick golden scales for skin and huge white and black eyes. Volstag would try something different this time. The androids had been ordered not to engage with the humans at all. Instead, they had forced them off the street and into a small park where the only thing they disrupted were a few children who wanted to play. He had assumed that they'd get tired of it, or at least the reporters would get tired of watching nothing happening. Instead, the story remained on the air longer, and the reporters began to interview people.
Who is that Zekamorn?
Volstag asked as he stood inside his office watching the protest. One of the tiny drones flew out, scanned him, then flew back and said,
He is the son of a professor of alien studies at the University of Benhanan.
So, at least he wasn't overly important. Just the son of someone who studied aliens and probably wanted to impress his mother. The protest continued to escalate, growing larger and more vehement with each passing day. The media coverage had turned it into a spectacle, amplifying the humans' demands and portraying the government's response as oppressive and unreasonable. Volstag Tusslesgraf, feeling the pressure from the escalating situation, called for a meeting with his advisors. The room was filled with holographic projections, displaying images of the protest and news reports from various planets across the Alliance.
We need to find a way to end this protest,
Volstag declared. One of his advisors suggested,
Perhaps we could offer some concessions to the humans. Allow them limited rights and privileges to appease their demands.
Volstag frowned.
We've already offered them more than any other sixth-class citizens. We can't risk destabilizing the societal structure that has maintained order for thousands of years.
Then the only other option is to make it harder for them, one of the advisors said, and the others quickly agreed. There had been other races who had a hard time integrating with the Alliance, and the solution had always been the same. You made it more uncomfortable for them until they decided it wasn't worth the fight. So the Alliance government imposed stricter curfews on all humans and limited their access to public spaces, cut their entertainment options to only those that would support the government, and eliminated almost all the flavor from their food allotments. Public gatherings were prohibited, and communication channels were closely monitored. As the restrictions tightened, so did the tensions. The humans' representatives condemned the government's actions, rallying support from other species who claimed the Alliance was betraying its core principles by doing exactly what it had always done. Volstag, under immense pressure, authorized the deployment of surveillance drones to monitor human activities more closely. The Alliance leaders, feeling the need to maintain control, initiated a series of mandatory workshops for all humans aimed at indoctrinating them with the principles of the Alliance. The humans reacted exactly the opposite of how everyone expected. The workshops, being one of the few places where they could meet, became where the problems seemed to spread. They would ignore the teachers who tried to explain to them how society worked or argue with them until the teacher gave up. And that was the easy part to deal with. They also began to cause trouble beyond the growing number and size of their protests. They would break windows, jam machinery, and even somehow got spray paint and began to cover the walls with symbols and slogans. Both sides continued to escalate as every time they tried to stop the humans, more people joined them. And not just that, but they became more certain that they were right. And it wasn't just the humans. The population of the other races in the Alliance began to question things they never had before. And not just how the humans were treated. They wanted explanations for hundreds of minor and major laws. The once controlled situation now spiraled into chaos. Volstag Tusslesgraf found himself trapped in a cycle of escalating responses, each exacerbating the tensions. The humans, feeling increasingly oppressed, responded with more fervor, and the unrest spread like wildfire. In the midst of the turmoil, the media portrayed the humans as oppressed victims, fueled the flames of discontent. The workshops, intended for indoctrination, became breeding grounds for resistance, with humans actively challenging the teachings and sowing seeds of dissent among their own kind. The Alliance government's decision to deploy surveillance drones only added fuel to the fire. The once trusted enforcers of order now became symbols of oppression. Reports of unrest spread across the Alliance, prompting discussions among various species about the morality and ethics of the government's actions. The Alliance, known for maintaining order and stability, found itself on the verge of internal discord. In an attempt to quell the uprising, Volstag's advisors proposed stricter measures. They suggested imposing harsher penalties, restricting access to resources, and isolating the humans even further. However, these measures only intensified the anger and resentment within the human population. The humans, once a rescued species, were now united against a common enemy, the Alliance government. The Alliance, blinded by its own rigid principles, failed to recognize that the more they responded with aggression, the more true the things the humans said were. The protests evolved into something more, bordering on but never quite becoming violent, and every time they tried to stop them, they proved they were an oppressive regime, and many species who originally indifferent started questioning the legitimacy of the government's actions. Volstag, feeling the weight of the situation, realized that the Alliance had inadvertently created a self-fulfilling prophecy. The harder they pushed, the stronger the resistance became. The media coverage, both within and outside the Alliance, painted a damning picture of the once stable governing body. Amid the chaos, Volstag found himself questioning the decisions that had led to this point. The humans, originally saved from their own destructive planet, had become the catalyst for a crisis that threatened the very foundation of the Alliance that had kept peace for over 10,000 years. As the situation spiraled out of control, Volstag faced a critical decision: continue down the path of oppression and risk the Alliance's stability, or find a way to address the humans' concerns and restore order through dialogue and compromise. Except it was too late. The Alliance government couldn't win anymore. And Volstag still wasn't sure where he went wrong. And so he finally decided he had only one choice. He ordered the patrol androids to arrest all the human ringleaders, and if they resisted, to kill them. One way or another, he was done with this. Except he wasn't. When the leaders were arrested, others took over. Sometimes they were worse, and sometimes they were better. But no matter who was in charge, the conflict continued for 2 more years. A blip in the Alliance, if you could call it the Alliance anymore. Because more changed in that time than had in the last 10 millennium, including making the class systems little more than symbolic, and humans beginning to join the councils and change things even more. That was when Volstag was removed from office. As one of the people who had led them down this path, he agreed he had to leave, but he still wasn't sure how he had lost when he had all the power.
Author's note: there is something counterintuitive about stopping the range of civil unrest from protests to insurgencies. What people want when someone does something they don't like is to punish them. With protests, this might be having the police shove them around or pepper spray them. If they do something like kidnap a bunch of people and hold them hostage or blow up a building, there is something cathartic about security clampdowns and military operations. Why shouldn't we hurt them since they hurt us? It's just fair. The problem is that it doesn't work. It never has. What is hard to understand is that a small force, say a group of protesters or someone more violent, is trying to make the larger force, such as the government and military, of a nuclear power overreact. But don't take my word for it. It's literally in the manual. That manual being FM 3-24, Insurgencies and Countering Insurgencies. It of course acknowledges that force may sometimes be needed, but it is also clear that isn't the long-term solution. So, why am I writing about this now? No particular reason, but I think it's worth understanding that if a country wants to have peace, rather than turning the international community against it, then its friends might encourage it to not overreact, because every person they kill turns more people against them, and that makes the people fighting them stronger. Another way to say it is that you can't kill your way to peace, just like darkness can't drive out darkness. Anyway, if you enjoyed this, you can sign up for my newsletter at ansci-fi.com, or my patron at patreon.com/Elton. Thank you. Elton Gar.